D.L. Hughley breaks the news. CNN, Saturday night at 10, Sunday night at 11.
James Dobson, a prominent voice of the evangelical movement, recently stepped down as chairman of Focus on the Family. So who is left to lead the religious right? Joining me now is a former evangelist and author of Crazy for God, Frank Schaffer. How you doing, Frank?
Fine.
It seemed as if President Bush was the perfect candidate for the religious right. He was born again. He was an evangelical. Right. He was an end-of-days believer. And so the the evangelical right got what they wanted.
Right.
What went wrong?
Well, he, first of all, was unqualified to be president. And
but all he had to do was believe in Jesus, right?
That's right. And that's why he got elected. And you saw this again in the last election when Sarah Palin was introduced as the vice presidential candidate for McCain. The only reason he picked her is because she was another born-again Christian, and he thought he'd throw that sop to the religious right. So the game continues, but this time it didn't work because people had it with voting for people just on the basis of their belief in kind of a fundamentalist Christianity.
But you grew up that way.
Yeah,
your father was instrumental in the evangelical movement.
My father was someone who was key to the formation of the religious right in the 1970s and 80s. You know, for people who know about that little subculture within our country, Francis and Anita Schaffer were big names. And Crazy for God, my book, the memoir, really starts talking about what it was like to grow up in that home. And then later, as we became so politically involved, you know, palling around with the Bush family, you know, Dad going to the Reagan White House a number of times and meeting with the president about, you know, pro-life issues and all these other things. That's the world I grew up in. And then as an adult, I really began to have second thoughts about where the religious right was going. And essentially, if I could put it this way, moved away from that background and politically changed sides. So, for instance, recently I've been one of the bloggers on Huffington Post and other places that have been supporting the Obama candidacy from the very beginning.
Right. And for me to
be doing that would be, you know, if you had asked me 25 years ago, would you be doing this, I would have thought you were crazy. But that's how people can change. So I changed my mind.
But your father, who was so integral in starting the evangelical movement, what would he think of the new you?
Well, you know, in some ways he would be pleased because my dad was very interested in the human life issue of abortion. But when it comes to things like gay bashing, political correctness on the right-wing issues, starting the war in Iraq for bad reasons or no reasons, my father would not have been going along with that. And so where the religious right went, which was to turn into this kind of hard-ass, neo-fascist kind of direction in America that has given us you know, 8 years of a bad presidency, a collapsed economy, 2 wars, one of which we shouldn't have been in. And by the way, my son was a United States Marine, so I talk with no apology about what I think about the war because he was.
We saw earlier how apologies can get you in trouble. Right. We won't do that.
He was out there getting shot at, so I can say what I want about it. And then the fact of the matter is, I just think we've come through a very, very bad time, and unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, my dad and I, when I was a young man, and he, in his career, had a lot to do with it, because we were the people who, along with others like James Dobson, Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, and the others, we put all this crap in place. And now, the reason I wrote Crazy for God is because the title is literally that if you approach God in a certain way, it will drive you crazy. Right. And this has been a period of craziness.
You've said some of the, you do blog for Huffington Post, and you've written some things, and I've read you for a little while, and you've written some things that I never heard anybody say out loud. You said that the Republican base is now made up of religious and neoconservative ideologues, and the uneducated white underclass with a token a person or two of color up in front of the TV to obscure the all-white, all-reactionary, all-backward, there is no global warming rude reality. Actual conservatives, let alone the educated classes, have long since fled. You believe that anybody in the Republican Party right now is either a neocon or an ideologue?
I'd put it different. I'd say that the Republican leadership knows that that's who their base is. Now, there'll be individuals, private citizens.
Elected people.
Yeah, I'm talking about the leadership. Either fall into one of those two categories. Either they are pandering to the religious right. I don't know what they believe personally. I can't get in their head. But they're either pandering to the religious right or they're pandering to the neocons to whom every war is a good war. And there's very little room in between. And the people, for instance, like William F. Buckley, who was a friend of my dad's, Barry Goldwater. You could have disagreed or agreed with them, but these were not crazy people. These were not Fruit Loops.
They wanted a separation of church and state.
Right, they wanted a separation of church and state. They were not using politics to beat people over the head with a moral crusade. They were not looking to start wars for no reason. We moved from a period when the Republicans represented something you could agree or disagree with, to a period where it represents a kind of a fundamentalist Christianity on one side and a view of the world which sees everyone who is other, whether that is black, white, Arab, Muslim, a different country, gay, as the enemy. And basically that's a very dangerous position. And so I think when you look at a guy like Rush Limbaugh today, what you're seeing is the lid off. This is the raw, naked, true face of where Republicanism is. And be my guest. If people want to vote for that, fine. We've just had 8 years of this that drove us over the cliff. And you want to keep going over the cliff, fine. But as far as I'm concerned, the greatest miracle, speaking of God, because I'm still a religious person, that has happened in my lifetime is the election of Barack Obama, who I think is in a position to genuinely turn this country around. It's going to take a while, but I'm tremendously optimistic about what he can do.
That is an amazing thing, because in your letter, you wrote an open letter to President Obama.
Right.
And you asked him not to even count on Republican backing.
Right.
Because you say that they hate him.
They do hate him.
They hate him.
They do hate him.
I mean, that's pretty strong.
Rush Limbaugh is telling the truth when he says he wants him to fail. And these people are ideological enough that they'd rather take our whole country down and be proved right than be patriotic Americans and stand up and do the thing that every American who loves this country would do right now, which is to support the president whether you voted for him or not.
Why then are men like Rush Limbaugh and a woman like Ann Coulter so tremendously popular? Why then? It makes me, as an American, go, this is how a large percentage of the country feels.
No, I don't think so. I think, you know, if people read my book, they're going to see that the religious right started with good intentions and then was manipulated by very crass people who have taken it in a different direction for personal gain. Today you have about 20 million people who buy all of Ann Coulter's books, watch Rush Limbaugh, send in the money to the televangelists. It's all the same people. The fact of the matter is there are 300 million of us. There's not 20 million of us. 20 million is I failed every math class I ever took.
Me too, you talk good.
I can't. But somebody in the audience will tell us what the percentage is,
right.
You know, 20 million of 300 million. It's not a big percentage. It's just a loud percentage. This is the drunk on the subway making all the trouble at the end of the car for all the people in the subway. There's 100 decent citizens on there. There's one ass at the front end who's molesting women. That's the Republican Party now in terms of the loud part.
I'm going to get in trouble again, aren't I?
Yeah, difference is I'm not apologizing nor kissing Rush Limbaugh's butt. There's quite a bit to kiss.
You know what? Thank you very much. Give it to Frank Schaffer.